Welcome back, AP. Yeah, look at that face. Oh man. So, I'll get him off camera. He's pretty sleepy. He doesn't even want to participate in this at all. But that poor attempt at him clapping right there was pretty cute. You gotta admit it. Now, anyway, so thank y'all so much for being so chill yesterday. I really appreciate it. I ended up having to go out of town to go see the niece and do some family stuff down in Maryland. So y'all's patience was very well appreciated. Now, as y'all should have gotten, you got your DBQ already. That one's going to be due after break, okay? However, remember, your thesis is due by Wednesday, all right? So go ahead and start reading through the documents, all right? And then on Wednesday, we'll talk about a thesis. I think we're going to kind of come together and sum up the documents a little bit together. And then by the end of class on Friday, you should be getting another study guide for the scientific revolution enlightenment stuff. However, I'm not sure if we're going to test on it or not. I think I might just end up counting a couple of other things as a test grade. You know what I'm saying? Like average some stuff together. Now, we'll get into that stuff a little bit later on, though. Don't worry about it right now. And because I don't really think that this unit necessarily lends itself to a big test, okay? But now we're going to get into my next adorable phase of this Prezi, the phase of the Enlightenment. All right, so really quick, getting into it. Of course, Enlightenment, new ideas, new theories, but it mainly pertains to, hold on one second, Priv just texted me, PHL 17. So, anyway, it mainly pertains to ideas about the government, right? Ideas about reason, rationality, the understanding of the human essence, how the mind works, how we understand anything, how should we be governed, how should they be governed, what is right, what is wrong, what's good, what's evil. Here's the little snippet to just kind of understand. The end. Oh my God, how do you not? All right, so here's the thing you need to understand. The Enlightenment kind of tries to answer the questions the scientific revolution never could, right? So, because it's not really based on experimental understanding. You can't experiment on what good or evil is. You can't experiment on why basically this puppy right here is the best puppy in the world. Oh, can we? He's a very sweet baby. He's trying to sleep though. So this is just basically like the life of a hound dog. He just basically just sleeps all day long. Now, anyway, let's really quick do something important though. Let's place ourselves in time. All right, so something that I noticed when I was going through all this stuff and being someone who is actually like licensed to teach these things, I neglect something all the time. And that's kind of like being able to slow down for 2 seconds and let you know where we are in time, right? Because if some of y'all noticed, and I'm sure you did, I know, for example, I know for a fact Grace noticed, I know Laura noticed, I know Mala noticed it, I know that Danielle over there noticed it, Anthony O'Toole noticed it, even Dion noticed it, right? We are bouncing around a lot right now, right? We did all the absolutism stuff up to Louis, right? And then we did everything up, we got all the way into the 1700s with Louis and Peter the Great and things like that. And then we just bounced all the way back to like Day Rev, right? So, which was in 1543. Well, the trends of the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment, ironically enough, are very chronological, but they were going on during that whole era of absolutism, all right? So you can draw this if you want, but you don't have to, okay? So I know for a fact Shane won't, but I get you dollars to a dozen that Annie Hatch is going to draw it, right? But this is just like a timeline, right? So you had several different things going on during this entire period, right? So Day Rev is issued in 1543, and then of course the 30 Years' War. Good Lord, stop a goal for God. Sorry. So the 30 Years' War is going to hit in 1618 to 1648, right? So as you can see, these things in perspective to one another are very far apart. You're talking about a 50-year difference, right? The 30 Years' War from 1618 to 1648, Galileo dies during that, right? So major tumultuous era in Europe, okay? Ironically enough, some people beg the question, it's like, how is it even possible that these thinkers were even able to come up with these ideas during a war that was rocking Europe so hard, right? Well, remember, the war, the 30 Years' War, really kind of just brings to light the decrease in the power of nobility and the expansion of political power of kings, right? Enlightened thought and scientific thought was still progressing forward during these times. So from 1642 to 1651, you had the English Civil War, of course, with Charles the excuse me, with Charles I. And during this process, Hobbes is going to publish the Leviathan. Louis is going to be crowned king in 1643. Louis the 14th, anyway, right? And then, of course, Newton's Principia hits in 1687. All of this stuff, right, is like all your scientific revolution shenanigans, okay? Now, the Enlightenment kind of starts off with, like, John Locke's two treatises on government in 1690. Peter the Great's Grand Embassy happened in 1697 when he takes the tour of Europe. Prussia crowns its first king, Wilhelm I, in 1713. And then Louis XIV is finally going to die in 1715, right? So all this era, of course, is known as the Enlightenment. Now, the Enlightenment really lurched forward after Louis's death, right? Because everybody began to question, was he actually a good king, yeah or no? Why is my hair sticking out like that? That's really annoying. So basically, though, these things have been going on just all over the place, right? And the scientific revolution was a series of events that kind of have already, like, started long before that, right? Like Nicholas Oram actually came long before Copernicus ever did, right? So, right, Emily O'Donnell? Now, going into it, though, so just so you understand, now that we're getting into the phase of the Enlightenment, the scientific revolution era was happening all mixed up in the era of, oh my god, this thing is annoying me, all mixed up in the era of absolutism. About time y'all got an offensive possession. Sorry, I'm watching lacrosse. So the big thing about it, though, is that the Enlightenment and what it is kind of comes off the heels of the scientific revolution, right? The scientific revolution kind of de facto caused the Enlightenment. But what the Enlightenment is, just to give you a heads up so you know going forward, right, is the intellectual, oh my god, intellectual, all right, so the intellectual and cultural movement of the late 17th and early 18th century, right? Now, what it is it's going to be a movement, intellectually speaking, focused around three key concepts. The ideas of reason. Next to this, I would like you to put rationalism really quick, using logic to understand different ideas, right? So, reason, scientific revolution-style study of human nature, all right? So, and what I mean by that is, like, granted, a lot of people say that, like, rationalism and empiricism, experiments and logic are two completely different things separated into apples and oranges different categories. When you really look at the Enlightenment, that's not necessarily true, right? The scientific revolution's ideas of questioning and theory and understanding really kind of, there's a fight, all right? So really kind of ended up going and demonstrating different ideas about the Enlightenment as well. People began to sit back and have scholarly discussions of, like, well, if I were to take this donut and put it in front of two starving men, would they hurt each other, right? So, like, understanding society based on ifs and whats, right? Also, the three other big concepts is progress. How do we make things better? How do we move forward as a society, right? Well, a lot of this stuff was also caused by the backlash of the 30 Years' War and the scientific revolution. Now, what I mean by the backlash of the 30 Years' War is now the fact that, like, a lot of large-scale religious ideas and differences are kind of finally coming to a close, a lot of people are beginning to question the ideas of, like, is anyone really right or wrong in this ideas and understanding of God? Is anybody really supposed to be, like, do we have any proof of who's right and wrong? What is God's role in our society, right? Why are we worried about, like, how we worship? Let's worry about where he's at, right? So going forward, though, big influential figures are going to start popping up. Like this guy, Spinoza, right? So Spinoza actually was around in the 1630s during the 30 Years' War, and his big magnum opus was a book called Ethics, right? He's kind of a great example of this post-30 Years' War idea about human nature, right? So he actually believed that, like, his extremely radical ideas include things like God and nature are not separated. They're the same thing, right? Also, big ideas on perception, right? His ideas on perception are like ethical values differ from person to person, right? A man who is starving will steal to feed his family and not feel bad about it, while a man who has the means is going to feel guilt and remorse. You understand what I'm saying? So also, his big thing is there's no such thing as good and evil. It depends on the person and the situation. So these radical ideas are very emblematic of this post-30 Years' War idea about human nature, right? Now, going forward, though, the roots of the Enlightenment politically as well are going to begin with your guys like Hobbes and Locke. Now, I know before the last test here, like, we talked about these guys for like 3 seconds. We talked about them a lot more than you realize. So the big thing that they're trying to do now is use rationality and reason to understand the best way for humans to be ruled. Because you can't really lead long-spanning 50-year-long experiments on, well, if we put this king in charge, like, who's going to come out on top? And are the people going to be happy? Well, the reigns last for 50 years. You know what I mean? Now, moving forward, though, of course, the big books are the Leviathan by Hobbes, and then 2 works, actually, by Locke. The 2 treatises on government, the 2 treatises on government. I always put an S in there for some reason. The 2 treatises on government and also on human understanding, right? So according to Hobbes, humans are awful. They give up power to a strong central leader. This is our social contract idea, right? That by giving up, like, humans are terrible. According to, like, Hobbes, humans will kill and destroy each other without any real provocation. And he basically boils it down to he doesn't trust anybody, right? His neighbor would just as likely burn his house down as be neighborly, right? So you give up the reins of your powers of speech and political, political revolt to a strong central figure who threatens your life on a regular basis, basically, right? That a strong leader has the right to punish you and possibly destroy your life and even take your property if he so sees fit to keep society in order. Well, Locke drastically disagrees with this. The white is his ideas in the 2 treatises on government. The red is his ideas that go with on human understanding, right? So according to Locke, he believes that humans have natural rights, life, liberty, property, and the most important one he actually believes is property. Now here's the ultimate irony in the situation. Locke actually shares the ideas of Hobbes in human nature, that people will destroy each other if there's not a government mediator there, right? So he also, though, believes that humans will be brutal, but governments are meant to guide you away from that brutality. That punishment is meant to try and curb that, not necessarily make you live in fear, right? So the big thing also that he advocated for was experience-based learning, right? And he called every human a blank slate, right? Tabula rasa. It's not rosa, it's rasa, R-A-S-A. Sorry, typo on my part. That we learn everything from experience, right? Well, this goes directly against what Descartes' ideas were. Oh my God, you have a huge thing of earwax in there. That's disgusting. Now, basically, though, Descartes believed that we have certain ideas in our mind, ethically speaking, and ideas on human nature that are endowed to us by God from birth, right? That we're born with ideas on how, like, society and people are supposed to work out, right? Locke disagrees with this. He believes that everybody learns based on experience, that the only reason you think murder isn't okay is because you were told it's not okay, right? So that's his big concepts. These 2 guys, Locke and Hobbes, are 2 of the original key out of their time Enlightenment thinkers, right? A lot of people actually believe that On Human Understanding to be one of the very, very first major works of the Enlightenment, which actually came out in 1690, right? So then also you've got the moving forward of society, right? So basically looking at this publication right here shows you just how people began to popularize the ideas of intellectual debate, right? So as you can see right here, this, what is this thing called again? I can never remember what it's called, but it's like on the public discourse of like the different systems. But what you can see right here is a man, an educated man, unfortunately, sorry Laura, educating a woman right here who's actually not even looking at the planets at all, but he's trying to share the new knowledge of the solar system and share it with the world, right? Which brings on a reemergence of this thing called skepticism, right? So it becomes popular to get in the goal. It becomes popular to actually question things. Do we really know these things? Where are these ideas coming from? And also with new thinkers during the scientific revolution kind of proving old assumptions wrong, the skepticism comes back. Now, the big thing about it is you had your ancient medieval skeptics, of course, Plato, Aristotle, Diogenes, right? Cicero, St. Augustine, all considered early skeptics, right? So skepticism has always existed, but it begins to come back, especially with this guy, Pierre Bayle, right? So Pierre Bayle came around in the 1690s, and he is a very famous skeptic, right? And he is actually a Huguenot who was actually like, what's the word I'm looking for? Not ostracized. he was banished, all right? So, like, politically banished to the Dutch Netherlands, where he actually wrote his historical and critical dictionary and argued against the tyrannical nature of Louis XIV, right? He criticized religious turmoil of the age. He's like, we're not supposed to be worried about who's praising God which way. This is another backlash of the 30 Years' War. We're supposed to be worried about what's the best way for our society to move forward. He advocated also for both sides, him being a Huguenot himself. He basically also said that assuming anything will destroy all of us, right? That assumptions given, like, the idea of assuming anything about a society, assuming people are good or bad, will actually destroy the world as we know it, right? So assumptions are bad. They make a something out of everyone, right? So now going forward, though, of course, we're just working out the base of the Enlightenment. Enlightenment thinkers and ideals. So we're going to get into the major people of the Enlightenment on Monday in class when we talk about French Enlightenment, because where do you think the Enlightenment started? Oh, in France, right? Following the death of Louis is kind of the lighter, like, once Louis is dead, you can kind of really start to question stuff, because you can't really question the Sun King, right? So following his death in 1715 and the later rise of the American Revolution, really quick, these things are not mutually related. You understand what I'm saying? So the death of Louis in 1715 is kind of the major, is the major foot on the gas into the Enlightenment, right? It lurches it forward. But popular opinion of the Enlightenment and questioning your government didn't even really come to a head until things like the American Revolution in 1775 actually kind of got kicked off, right? So what I'm getting at is that these two things kind of mark your beginning of the popular Enlightenment in France, and this event kind of shows you when these ideas became accepted, right? Now, Okay, he lays like this from time to time where he decides that he's just going to stick one of his arms up in the air. Where'd his head go? Oh, it's over there. Now, anyway, so he likes to sleep like this for some reason, so please ignore my dog's foot in the screen for a moment, right? Now, the growth of the Enlightenment ideas and also the public acceptance of Enlightenment ideas began to kind of generate this new idea of the philosophe, right? The person that actually is a French intellectual that believes that they were lighting the world with the gifts of intelligence, right? That Voltaire could be considered a heavy philosophe, right? Adam Smith is not a philosophe, he's Scottish. Montesquieu, philosophe. The Marquise, that some of them actually are philosophers, right? Denis Diderot is a philosophe. So the philosophe is the French intellectual that kind of popularizes the idea of the Enlightenment, right? Now, getting into it, France is the big center of all these Enlightenment ideas, and that's where we're going to start on Monday with all these different people, because we're going to finish the Enlightenment before we go off the Christmas break. Now, France, though, huge area, hell yeah, for the Enlightenment, because it's for three major key reasons, right? Like, why France? Why is France the center of the Enlightenment? Why not England? Why not Scotland? Well, due to the fact that, first of all, France also economically had a huge boom after the 30 Years' War. I mean, like, look at Louis go. Like, he introduced the ideas of mercantilism with Colbert, and they actually began to grow their funds and their power and their force within all of Europe. But the big thing about it is France was the international language of the elite, right? Do you remember Peter the Great, right? He is amidst all this Enlightenment era. He didn't even allow his nobles, when they talked to him about state matters, to speak anything but French, all right? So French is the language of the intelligent, right? The language of the intellectual. Now, it is also the most populous country in Europe, right? It's growing rapidly. It's got agrarian sectors in the south and civil, in borderline at this point, industrial sectors in the north. It is a very large, very powerful heavy hitter in the country, right? Here's the other big thing. French citizens were not as restrained by their absolutists in speech or in art, right? A lot of this had to do with the fact that the absolutists in France were really kind of looking to grow their power, not really worried about limiting the ideas of an intellectual, right? Now, some of you are like, well, Pierre Bayle got banished to the Netherlands. Well, he left mainly because he was being religiously persecuted. Himself being a Huguenot, he was not about to wait around for Louis to, like, I don't know, burn his house down, right? So, because remember what Louis did? He revoked that what? Very good job, Denny. Revoked the Edict of Nantes, right? So, French citizens were just simply not as restrained, though, by their government. And also, French philosophers, the big thing is they had this amazing inter-intellectual realm of exchanging of intelligence. They sought to spread the word to the educated nobles. They weren't worried about it spreading it to the poor, which per capita there were more nobles in France than there were in any other area, right? There was a lot more money residing in France than there was anywhere else, even though ironically enough they weren't that big in the colonization game at the time. They were just looking to hold on. Remember mercantilism? They're looking to hold on to as much money as they possibly can get. So French philosophers seek to spread their word through educated nobles, not the poor. That's why they refer to themselves as the Republic of Letters. So here's the thing about not being restrained. Were they allowed to issue books that said, you know what, Louis, kind of an a-hole? No, not allowed to do. They're not allowed to do that, right? Like, they weren't allowed to do all that. But to avoid the censors, what they would do is they would actually write letters back and forth to each other. They would write letters back and forth to each other and actually issue different ideas in these letters to one another. They would write letters to nobles. They would write letters to different marquises. And it became this like international, almost like pre-internet exchange of ideas from wealthy to wealthy, right? Now, also, they issued manuscripts a lot, right? Manuscripts being a collection of letters and a collection of personal ideas, not necessarily books, right? After seeing Galileo get put under house arrest for his dialogue on two world systems, people began to understand, they're like, okay, we might be persecuted if we directly throw this into people's faces, right? So they became this like underground intellectual network. It's actually really, really neat. So that right there is where we're going to end, though. And then we're going to pick up on a lot of different stuff on Monday when we talk about Voltaire. We're going to talk about Montesquieu. We're going to talk about, like, we're going to even get into people like Wollstonecraft in Britain, and then Adam Smith, and he's kind of ticklish. But signing off here for the weekend, and we'll pick this other stuff back up on Monday. And do you want to say bye? Do you want to say bye? And so Rufio says bye, and we'll see you guys later, okay? So you guys have a good weekend. I'll see you on Monday.